Welcome back, guys. In this Sleepsense session, we're diving into something that might just shake how you see the world. The lies your brain tells you every single day. From distorted memories to fake patterns it invents. Your mind doesn't always show you the truth. Before we begin, let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you right now. It's always fascinating to see how far this community reaches around the world. All right, get comfortable, dim the lights, and let's explore why your brain might be your biggest illusionist. False memory. There's a memory inside your head right now that feels real, completely real. You can see it, feel it, maybe even relive it if you try hard enough. You remember where you were, who was there, what was said. You'd bet money on it. But what if I told you that memory might never have happened? Not the way you think it did. Maybe not at all. This is the terrifying reality of a false memory. When your brain invents moments, fills in blanks, and twists reality into something that never existed, but feels as real as the air you're breathing. Your mind doesn't record your life like a camera. It rebuilds it. And each time you recall a memory, you're not replaying the original moment. You're reconstructing it, slightly differently every time. And the more often you recall it, the more distorted it can become. Psychologists have proven this. In controlled studies, researchers planted fake childhood memories in people's minds. They'd say things like, "Remember when you got lost in a mall?" And suddenly, people began describing it in vivid detail. What they saw, how they felt, even who found them. But it never happened. Some even swore they met Bugs Bunny at Disneyland. Problem is, Bugs Bunny isn't a Disney character. That memory is literally impossible, but their brain accepted it anyway, without hesitation. Why? Because your mind cares more about a good story than the truth. It wants the pieces to fit. It wants the emotion to make sense. And if it has to lie to do that, it will. So the next time you feel absolutely certain about something you remember, pause. Ask yourself, did this really happen? Or did my brain just make it feel like it did? Because sometimes your most trusted memories might be nothing but fiction. Baader-Meinhof phenomenon. Have you ever learned about something new, a word, a song, a concept, and then suddenly you start seeing it everywhere? It feels like the universe is bombarding you with that thing, as if it's following you. This strange experience is called the Baader-Meinhof phenomenon, also known as the frequency illusion. It's a powerful mental glitch where your brain tricks you into believing something new has suddenly become incredibly common, just because your attention has been captured. The reality, it was probably always there, but your mind only started noticing once it was primed. What's happening deep inside your brain is a blend of two forces. First, selective attention. Once you focus on something, your brain filters the world to find more of it, like shining a spotlight in the dark. Second, confirmation bias. Your brain seeks evidence to support what you already believe or notice, ignoring things that don't fit. Together, these create the illusion that the thing you just learned or noticed is everywhere, when really, it's just your brain flooding your awareness with it. It's a feedback loop, a trap that rewires your perception without you realizing. This phenomenon isn't just harmless curiosity. It shapes how you perceive trends, news, and even social connections. It can make you think you're suddenly surrounded by people who share your interests or fears. It can reinforce stereotypes, misinformation, or conspiracy theories, simply because your brain is wired to notice and believe what it wants to see. The Baader-Meinhof phenomenon exposes just how fragile and subjective your reality is, showing that what you perceive as common or important is often just a trick of your own mind. So next time you feel like the world is suddenly filled with something new you just discovered, remember, your brain is playing a trick on you, making the familiar seem like a new obsession, and shaping your reality in the process. Mandela Effect. There are moments when millions of people remember something the exact same way. A logo, a movie quote, a historical event. And yet none of it ever happened. They aren't guessing or unsure. They're confident, certain. They'll argue over it, swear by it, and even feel emotionally attached to it. That's the Mandela Effect, when large groups of people share the same false memory. It's named after the eerie phenomenon where countless people around the world remembered Nelson Mandela dying in prison during the 1980s. They remembered the news coverage, the mourning, even the funeral. But in reality, Mandela didn't die until 2013. The memory was completely false, yet widespread and deeply believed. And that's not the only one. People are convinced the Monopoly man had a monocle. He never did. They remember the Fruit of the Loom logo with a cornucopia. It doesn't exist. They can quote Darth Vader saying, "Luke, I am your father." Except the actual line is, "No, I am your father." These aren't just small mistakes. They're shared, vivid memories that seem to come from another version of reality. Some scientists blame it on how the brain reconstructs memory, patching together fragments and emotions to form a believable picture. But others believe something deeper is going on. Shifts in timelines, alternate realities bleeding into each other, or even glitches in a simulated universe. Because when millions of people remember the same thing incorrectly, and the past looks different than we all recall, something doesn't add up. And if your mind can create false memories that feel real, if history itself can shift without warning, then how would you ever know what's real and what was never supposed to be? Tetris Effect. You play a game for hours, then lie down to sleep, and you still see the blocks falling behind your eyelids. You walk down the street and mentally rotate shapes in the buildings, organize boxes in your head like pieces in a puzzle, feel your thoughts moving in patterns you didn't choose. That's the Tetris Effect, a strange phenomenon where your brain keeps repeating a task, even when the task is over. It's not a glitch. It's a glimpse into how your brain rewires itself, silently, constantly, just from repetition. When you do something over and over, especially something visual or emotional, your brain begins to prioritize it. It starts to practice it in the background, even when you're not aware. And it's not just about video games. Taxi drivers in London grow larger memory centers from navigating streets. Chess players dream of boards. Gamblers see slot machines when they blink. People who scroll social media for hours start thinking in short, shallow bursts. People stuck in worry start seeing threats where none exist. Your brain is always adapting, always optimizing for what you focus on. And that means it doesn't just reflect your life. It becomes it. Every habit, every thought, every obsession gets reinforced. Even things you hate thinking about, the fears, the doubts, the loops, your brain strengthens them just by repeating them. The Tetris Effect shows us something terrifying. Your mind is plastic, and it's always molding itself into whatever you do most. The game ends, but your brain keeps playing. The app closes, but the loop continues. So if your mind is practicing something when you're not paying attention, what exactly is it turning you into? Déjà vu. You're walking through a hallway, or talking with someone, or maybe just turning your head, and suddenly it hits you. A strange, silent wave of familiarity crashes over your mind. For a split second, you feel like you've lived this exact moment before. The sights, the sounds, the emotion. It all feels like a perfect replay. But then logic kicks in. You've never been here. This conversation has never happened. And yet, it feels too familiar. That's déjà vu, French for already seen. And it's one of the strangest and most deeply unnerving tricks your brain can pull. It doesn't just suggest the past, it convinces you of it. And in that moment, no explanation feels satisfying, because the moment itself feels real. Scientists have tried to explain it. Some say it's a simple misfire, that your brain accidentally stores an experience in long-term memory before you've consciously processed it, tricking you into thinking you're remembering something that just happened. Others believe it's your brain recognizing patterns from a similar situation in your past and overreacting. But neither theory explains the intensity, because déjà vu isn't just a glitch, it's a certainty, a spiritual jolt, a flash of recognition that feels bigger than this life. That's why some people believe déjà vu is something more, a ripple from a parallel universe, a memory from a dream, a signal that time isn't linear, or even a warning, a clue that something in your reality is repeating itself. It lasts only seconds, but for those few moments, you're suspended in a strange limbo, caught between now and something you can't quite reach. A ghost of a moment that shouldn't exist, but absolutely does. And the scariest part is, you'll never know why. Inattentional blindness. You think you see everything around you, every object, every detail, every movement. But the truth is, your eyes are open, and your brain is blind. Inattentional blindness is what happens when your mind becomes so focused on one thing, it completely blocks out everything else, even if it's right in front of you. In one famous experiment, people were asked to count how many times a basketball was passed between players. They focused hard, counting every pass with laser precision. And yet, nearly half of them missed something impossible to ignore. A person in a full gorilla costume walking straight through the scene. Not hiding, not fast, just calmly walking through the middle. And somehow, they didn't see it. This isn't stupidity. This is how your brain works. It filters out everything it deems unimportant, even if it's obvious. It gives you the illusion of awareness, while carefully removing what doesn't match your focus. That means right now, at this very moment, there could be something crucial, something dangerous, something life-changing, sitting just outside your perception, and you'd never notice. Because your attention is a spotlight, and everything outside that beam may as well not exist. This doesn't just happen in experiments. It happens on roads, in courtrooms, in memories, and even in trauma. Victims don't see the attacker's face. Drivers don't see the child crossing. We think we saw everything, but we didn't. And that's the terrifying truth. Your brain doesn't show you the world. It shows you a version of the world. And sometimes it decides to leave out everything that matters most. Change blindness. You're in a room. You glance at the objects around you, the colors, the people, the little details. You feel like you've taken it all in. You trust your eyes. But then something changes. Not a tiny detail, a major one. A person is swapped. An object disappears. A color shifts. And you don't notice at all. That's change blindness, when your brain fails to detect even obvious changes in your environment, simply because your focus wasn't locked onto the right thing. Your mind assumes the world is stable. It fills in the blanks. It smooths the transitions. And you walk away thinking you saw everything, when in reality, you saw almost nothing. In a famous experiment, participants were shown two images that flickered back and forth with a blank screen in between. A plane engine vanishes. A man's shirt changes color. A car disappears from a parking lot. Yet people stare at the screen and see nothing wrong. Minutes pass. Frustration builds. Then finally, once the change is revealed, it's so obvious that it feels embarrassing. But it's not your fault. It's how your brain works. It edits out anything it doesn't think is important. Even if that thing is huge, it would rather give you a consistent illusion than a chaotic truth. Even more disturbing. This happens in real life, all the time. In one live study, an actor asked strangers for directions. While they were talking, two men rudely walked between them, carrying a giant door. In that moment, the actor switched with another person, a completely different face, height, and even clothing, and most people didn't notice. They just kept giving directions, completely unaware that the person standing in front of them had changed. Their brain had already decided who was there, and it refused to update, even when reality did. So think about your past, your relationships, your memories. What changed while you weren't looking? What faded out, shifted, or broke completely, and your brain simply filled in the gaps? Because the scariest changes in life are the ones you never knew happened at all. Rubber hand illusion. You sit down at a table. A rubber hand is placed in front of you. It's lifeless, fake, disconnected. Your real hand is hidden from sight, behind a barrier. Then something simple happens. A researcher begins stroking the fake hand and your real hand at the same time, in the same rhythm, in the same spot. And after just a minute or two, something disturbing starts to happen. You begin to feel the touch on the rubber hand. Not as a trick, not as confusion. You actually feel it, as if that fake hand is yours. The longer it continues, the more convinced your brain becomes. And when someone suddenly threatens the rubber hand, stabs it with a fork, or smashes it with a hammer, your body reacts. You flinch. You panic. Your nervous system screams, because your brain has now accepted something fake as part of your physical self. This is the rubber hand illusion, and it reveals a terrifying truth. Your sense of body, of what's you and what isn't, is not fixed. It's not stable. It's not even accurate. It's constructed, second by second, based on what you see and what you feel. And if those signals line up just right, your brain will adopt anything. A rubber hand, a prosthetic limb, a virtual avatar. Your brain will rewrite the borders of you without asking for permission. And it doesn't just stop with hands. This illusion hints at something much darker, that your entire body image is hackable, that your sense of self is vulnerable, and that your brain would rather protect the illusion of ownership than admit the truth. So what else in your life, in your mind, in your identity, has been accepted as real, just because it feels like it belongs to you? Hollow face illusion. You stare at a mask. You know it's hollow, concave, inverted, like the inside of a mold. There's no question about it. You can walk around it. You can shine a light into it. Your rational mind knows exactly what it is. But the moment you look at it head on, something bizarre happens. Your brain flips it. You no longer see a hollow face turning inward. You see a fully normal face, shaped outward. A face that appears to follow you as you move. A face that shouldn't exist. But now it's staring right at you. And no matter how hard you try to unsee it, your brain refuses to cooperate. It insists on the lie. That's the hollow face illusion, a powerful glitch in your perception that reveals how fragile and manipulatable your reality truly is. But why does this happen? Because your brain is obsessed with faces. It's been wired, over thousands of years, to recognize them instantly, in shadows, in patterns, in clouds. But more than just recognizing them, it demands that they be normal, symmetrical, convex, familiar. And when it encounters a face that breaks those rules, like a mask turned inside out, it doesn't try to process the truth. It just overrides it. Your mind forcefully corrects the error, warping the image into something safe, something believable. But what's scary is this. Your brain isn't showing you what's real. It's showing you what it thinks should be real. This isn't just about a mask. It's about everything. What else are you seeing correctly, only because your brain refuses to handle the actual shape of reality? What other lies are being smoothed over, not to deceive you, but to protect you from a truth you were never meant to see? Ames room illusion. Imagine walking into a room that looks completely normal. The walls, the floor, the ceiling. Everything seems perfectly straight, balanced, and symmetrical. But as you look closer, something feels off. People standing in opposite corners appear to be wildly different sizes. One person looks like a giant, towering over the other who seems like a child. Yet, as you move around, you realize the room isn't what it seems. This is the Ames room illusion, a mind-bending trick where your brain's assumptions about perspective and space get shattered, revealing just how easily your reality can be warped. The trick is in the shape of the room itself. The floor and ceiling aren't parallel, the walls are slanted, and the entire space is distorted. But your brain, trained to see rooms as rectangular boxes, tries to fit this warped space into its existing mental model. It assumes right angles and equal distances, and so it wildly misjudges the size and scale of objects inside. The people you see aren't actually different sizes. They're standing at different distances and heights, in a distorted room your brain can't interpret correctly. But your mind doesn't see the distortion. It just sees the impossible. And it accepts that as reality. This illusion shows how much your perception depends on assumptions, on shortcuts your brain takes to make sense of the world quickly. But shortcuts can be deceiving. They can make you see giants and dwarfs where there are none. They can make the impossible seem normal. And if your brain can be tricked so easily by something as simple as a crooked room, what else in your life, your memories, your beliefs, your sense of self, could be just as distorted? What truths are hidden behind the illusions your mind insists on believing? So the next time you think you see the world clearly, remember the Ames room. Because sometimes your brain doesn't just interpret reality, it invents it. Cognitive dissonance. Your mind craves balance and consistency. It wants your beliefs, your actions, and your feelings to line up perfectly, neat, logical, and comfortable. But what happens when they don't? When you act in a way that clashes with how you see yourself? That's when cognitive dissonance kicks in. A powerful mental discomfort, a tension deep inside your brain that feels like a silent scream for relief. This tension is so unbearable that your mind will do almost anything to get rid of it. It will twist facts, rewrite memories, justify actions, or outright deny reality, all to keep your self-image intact. Imagine you believe you're a good, honest person, but then you lie or hurt someone intentionally. Instead of facing that truth, your brain spins a story. It was necessary. They deserved it. Or everyone else would have done the same. You convince yourself to feel less guilty, less conflicted. You block out the nagging feeling of wrongdoing. This mental gymnastics isn't just about making excuses. It shapes how you see the world, how you treat others, and even your deepest values. It's why people stay trapped in toxic relationships, defend harmful beliefs, or refuse to admit mistakes, even when evidence screams otherwise. Cognitive dissonance is your brain's way of protecting the ego, but at a terrible price. A distorted reality that feels like truth. And it doesn't stop there. It colors your politics, your friendships, your entire identity. Every time your actions don't match your beliefs, dissonance grows, and your brain adapts, sometimes rewriting history to preserve your peace of mind. It's a silent war between truth and comfort, between reality and the version your mind prefers to live in. So the next time you feel uneasy, restless, or defensive, ask yourself, is this discomfort a call to face reality? Or is your brain twisting facts to keep you comfortable in a lie? Because sometimes the hardest truth to accept is the one your own mind won't let you see. Illusory truth effect. You hear a statement once, maybe twice. It sounds plausible, maybe even believable. You don't think much about it, but then you hear it again, and again, and again. Suddenly, it feels true. Your mind starts accepting it as fact. not because it's been proven, but simply because it's familiar. This is the illusory truth effect, a sneaky mental trick where repetition makes lies feel like truth and makes truth feel unquestionable. It doesn't matter if the statement is false, absurd, or even dangerous. The more often your brain encounters it, the more it lowers its guard. It stops critically analyzing and just says, "This feels right." Advertisers know this. Politicians use it. Social media feeds it non-stop. You see headlines, slogans, memes, and sound bites repeated over and over until your brain stops questioning and just accepts. This is how misinformation spreads, how conspiracy theories grow roots, how your beliefs get shaped not by facts, but by familiarity. The scary part? This effect operates beneath your awareness. You think you're thinking critically, but your brain is quietly rewiring what you believe, one repetition at a time. The more you hear something, the harder it becomes to unhear it, the harder it becomes to doubt it. So, when you find yourself believing something without solid proof, ask yourself, is it true, or just repeated enough to feel that way? Misinformation effect. Your memory feels like a faithful record of your past, a clear video playing back moments exactly as they happened. But that's a comforting illusion. The misinformation effect reveals that your memories are fragile and malleable, vulnerable to being rewritten after the fact. Imagine witnessing an event, then hearing someone else's version. A rumor, a misleading question, or a biased retelling. Over time, those external details slip into your mind, mixing with your original memory until you can't separate what truly happened from what was suggested later. You find yourself remembering things that never actually occurred, vivid and clear, and you swear they're real. Psychologists have run countless experiments to show how easy it is to alter memories. In one study, people who saw a car accident were asked questions about a broken headlight, even though none existed. Shockingly, many later remembered the broken headlight with great confidence, convinced it was part of the crash. This happens because your brain isn't a video recorder, but a storyteller. It reconstructs memories each time you recall them, and during that process, new information can sneak in, altering the story without you realizing it. Your memory becomes a blend of fact and fiction, shaped by suggestion, emotion, and time. What's even scarier is that this effect isn't confined to labs. It infiltrates courtrooms, friendships, family histories, and even your own identity. Eyewitness testimonies get distorted, relationships fray over false recollections, and entire histories can be rewritten by collective misinformation. Your sense of reality, your understanding of your own life, can become a patchwork of true and false memories, indistinguishable from each other. So next time you remember something clearly and confidently, pause and wonder, is that memory really yours, or has it been rewritten by someone else's story? Pareidolia. Have you ever stared at clouds, the rough surface of a wall, or even a patch of peeling paint, and suddenly, a face seemed to emerge? Or maybe you saw shapes in the shadows, animals in the stars, or figures lurking in the flicker of firelight. That's pareidolia, a deeply wired quirk of your brain that forces meaning and order onto random, meaningless patterns. It's not imagination or coincidence. It's your brain's survival mechanism, shaped over thousands of years, designed to spot faces and familiar shapes fast. Because recognizing a face could mean the difference between friend and foe, life and death. Your mind constantly searches for these patterns, even when none exist. And when it finds them, it convinces you they are real. This is why people see religious icons burned into toast, the shapes of monsters in shadows, or hidden messages in clouds and tree bark. Your brain craves meaning so intensely that it invents it, projecting stories onto the chaos of the world. This ability once kept our ancestors alive by helping them quickly identify threats, spotting a predator hidden in the underbrush or a human face in the dark. But today, this instinct sometimes runs wild, blurring the line between reality and illusion. It makes us prone to superstition, conspiracy theories, and seeing signs in everyday life that might simply be nothing more than the brain's pattern-making gone too far. What makes pareidolia especially unsettling is that it reminds you of how fragile your perception really is. The images and faces you see aren't always out there. Sometimes they're inside your mind, projections of your fears, your hopes, or your need for connection. Your brain fills in the gaps, paints stories onto the blank canvas of chaos, and convinces you that what you see is truth. But the truth is far more complicated. Your senses don't just capture reality. They interpret, filter, and sometimes invent it to keep you safe, sane, and connected. So the next time you catch a face in the clouds or see a figure in the flicker of flames, remember this: your brain isn't revealing the world to you. It's telling you a story shaped by millions of years of evolution, and sometimes by your deepest fears. Stroop Effect. Imagine seeing the word red printed in bright blue ink. You instinctively want to read the word aloud, but your brain rebels. It forces you to say the color of the ink instead of the word itself. This battle between what your eyes see and what your mind tries to say is the Stroop Effect, a simple but unsettling demonstration of how your brain processes conflicting information. It reveals the hidden struggle beneath your conscious thoughts, where automatic responses collide with deliberate control. For a brief moment, your mind is trapped in a conflict it can't easily resolve. The Stroop Effect exposes the limits of your cognitive control. Your brain reads words almost effortlessly, a process so automatic you barely notice. But naming the ink color requires a different, slower mental path. When these two processes conflict, your brain experiences interference, causing hesitation, errors, and even frustration. This conflict isn't just a quirk of word reading. It reflects how your brain constantly juggles competing demands, filters distractions, and suppresses impulses. It's a glimpse into the complexity and vulnerability of your mental systems. What's chilling is how often your brain deals with conflicting information in memories, beliefs, emotions, and perceptions. The Stroop Effect is a microcosm of a deeper truth. Your mind isn't a single unified entity. It's a battleground of competing processes, each trying to control what you think and do. And sometimes, the very thing you want to say or believe is held hostage by another part of your brain. So the next time you hesitate, stumble, or struggle to say what you mean, remember, your mind is fighting a silent war, and you're the battlefield. Framing Effect. Imagine being told a medical treatment has a 90% survival rate. You feel hopeful, maybe even eager to try it. But then you hear the exact same information phrased differently, a 10% mortality rate, and suddenly your feelings shift. You hesitate, fear creeps in, doubt clouds your judgment. This is the framing effect, a powerful psychological phenomenon that reveals how the way information is presented shapes not only what you think, but how you feel and decide. Your brain doesn't process facts in isolation. It filters every piece of data through emotional and cognitive lenses that are heavily influenced by wording, context, and presentation. This effect shows just how fragile and malleable your decisions really are. Two identical truths can trigger entirely opposite reactions depending solely on how they're framed. A gain or a loss, a risk or a benefit, a success or a failure. Advertisers, politicians, and media experts understand this all too well. They craft messages designed to nudge you one way or another, knowing your brain responds more strongly to negative frames, a bias called loss aversion. This isn't just about marketing or politics. The framing effect shapes life-changing decisions, from your health choices and financial investments to your social beliefs and relationships. What makes it so unsettling is that this influence happens beneath your awareness. You believe your decisions are rational and free, but in reality, they're being guided by subtle manipulations of context and language. Your reality is not just what you observe or know, it's how that information is packaged and delivered to you. And behind every choice you make lies a silent battle between fact and framing. So the next time you find yourself making a decision, pause and ask yourself, is this what I truly believe, or what I've been persuaded to believe? Dunning-Kruger Effect. Have you ever met someone who is so confident in what they say, so sure they're right, but their knowledge or skill is actually painfully limited? This is the Dunning-Kruger Effect, a cognitive bias where people with low ability or knowledge in an area overestimate their competence, while experts often underestimate theirs. It's a psychological blind spot that traps the unskilled in a bubble of false confidence, making it almost impossible for them to recognize their own ignorance. And what's terrifying is how common this is. It affects everyone, including you. The root of the effect is simple but cruel. The skills needed to be competent at something are often the same skills needed to recognize competence. Without that knowledge, you don't know what you don't know. You mistake your ignorance for expertise. Meanwhile, true experts see the complexity and depth of a subject, making them more aware of how much they don't know, leading to humility and sometimes self-doubt. This creates a dangerous paradox, where those least qualified are often the most vocal and confident, while the truly knowledgeable stay quiet or second-guess themselves. This bias isn't just an amusing quirk. It has real consequences in everyday life, from workplace decisions and politics to social media arguments and scientific debates. It fuels misinformation, polarization, and stubbornness. It traps people in echo chambers of false certainty, preventing learning and growth. And the worst part? The Dunning-Kruger effect makes it hard to fix itself. Those caught in its grip often reject feedback or correction, convinced they're already right. So the next time you feel overly confident about something, or when someone else seems too sure for their own good, remember this. True wisdom starts with knowing the limits of your knowledge. Confirmation. Bias. Your brain craves certainty. It wants to be right, to feel secure in its beliefs, no matter what. But instead of objectively weighing facts, your mind takes a shortcut. It searches out evidence that confirms what you already believe and ignores, dismisses, or forgets anything that challenges your worldview. This is confirmation bias, one of the most powerful and dangerous mental traps. It doesn't just influence what you think, it shapes how you filter every piece of information, creating a personalized echo chamber inside your head. From politics to religion, friendships to work, confirmation bias colors everything. When you browse social media, you gravitate toward posts and opinions that align with your beliefs. You remember the times your views were right, but conveniently forget when you were wrong. You interpret ambiguous information in a way that fits your narrative, and you push aside uncomfortable truths that might force you to change. This bias doesn't just make you stubborn, it rewires how you process reality itself. Over time, it isolates you in a bubble where your beliefs grow stronger, no matter how false or dangerous they might be. What makes confirmation bias especially frightening is how unconscious it is. You think you're making rational, fair decisions, but beneath the surface, your mind is stacking the deck, silently protecting itself from doubt and discomfort. This bias fuels polarization, misinformation, and conflict on massive scales. It makes it harder to learn, to empathize, and to grow. It's why good people fight bitterly over facts, why conspiracy theories spread like wildfire, and why progress can feel impossible. Your mind becomes a hall of mirrors, reflecting only what it wants to see and hiding everything else. So the next time you feel absolutely certain you're right, take a moment and ask yourself, are you seeking truth, or just reinforcing your own beliefs? Because sometimes The most dangerous lies are the ones your brain tells itself to keep feeling safe. Spotlight effect. Have you ever walked into a room and felt like everyone was staring directly at you? Like every awkward move, every stain on your shirt, every slight slip-up is magnified for all to see. That overwhelming sensation is called the spotlight effect, a cognitive bias where you dramatically overestimate how much others notice your actions, appearance, or mistakes. It's as if you believe a giant spotlight is shining on you at all times, illuminating your every flaw and moment of embarrassment. But here's the truth. Most people are too busy worrying about themselves to pay nearly as much attention as you think. Your brain tricks you into believing you're the center of everyone's world. This bias is rooted in self-consciousness and social anxiety, amplifying your perception of how visible and scrutinized you really are. It can make simple social interactions feel like performances under a harsh spotlight, causing stress, hesitation, and even avoidance. The spotlight effect doesn't just mess with your social life, it warps your reality, making you feel isolated and judged, when in fact, most people barely notice. Your worries, your mistakes, your quirks, they're often invisible to others, but your brain convinces you they're front and center. What's terrifying about the spotlight effect is how much it influences your behavior without your knowledge. It can hold you back from speaking up, trying new things, or being yourself. It feeds a cycle of self-doubt and anxiety, shrinking your world as you try to avoid the imaginary spotlight. This mental distortion shows just how much your mind controls your perception of reality, crafting fears and insecurities that don't match the outside world. So the next time you feel like all eyes are on you, remember this. You're probably standing in a much smaller spotlight than you think, and the world is far less focused on you than your mind would have you believe. Projection. Bias. Your brain loves to predict the future, to imagine what you'll want, feel, or believe tomorrow, next week, or even years from now. But here's the catch. It often assumes you'll want the exact same things you want right now. This is called projection bias, a mental glitch where your current feelings, desires, and preferences are projected onto your future self as if they will never change. You believe that the way you feel in this moment is permanent, and that your future decisions will align perfectly with your present mindset. The truth is, people change, their desires shift, their values evolve, but your brain struggles to accept that. Projection bias affects countless decisions: what you buy, where you live, who you date, and even major life choices. You might decide to buy that expensive gadget because it feels necessary right now, only to regret it months later when your needs and interests have changed. You assume that your current mood will persist and plan your future around it, often leading to disappointment or frustration. This bias blinds you to your own growth and transformation. It traps you in a mental time capsule, locking your future in the present. What's unsettling about projection bias is how deeply it influences your sense of self and your control over your life. It creates blind spots in your self-awareness, making it hard to anticipate your own change. It fuels regret and confusion when your future self doesn't match the plans you made. And it's one of the reasons people find themselves stuck in jobs, relationships, or habits that no longer fit them, simply because their brain insisted that what they wanted today would last forever. So next time you make a big decision based on how you feel right now, pause and ask yourself, will this really matter to me in a year? Or am I projecting my current self onto a future that's still unwritten? Anchoring bias. Imagine walking into a store to buy a jacket. The first one you see is priced at $500. Expensive, right? Then you find another jacket for $300, and suddenly it feels like a bargain. That initial $500 price stuck in your mind. It's your anchor, and it shapes how you judge everything after. This is anchoring bias, a mental shortcut where your brain relies too heavily on the first piece of information it receives, even if it's irrelevant or misleading. Once anchored, your judgments and decisions become skewed, often without you realizing it. Anchoring happens everywhere, from shopping to salary negotiations, from legal judgments to political opinions. Your brain instinctively grabs onto that first number, fact, or idea, and uses it as a baseline to measure everything else. Even when you know better, the anchor tugs at your reasoning like a silent puppeteer. This bias can cause you to overpay, underestimate risks, or settle for less, simply because the first figure planted in your mind feels like the correct starting point. What makes anchoring bias especially unsettling is how subconscious it is. You believe your decisions are rational, objective, and fair, but in reality, your brain is quietly chained to a random initial piece of data. It limits your perspective, narrows your options, and locks you into a frame that may not fit the situation. Anchoring bias is a hidden influence that distorts your reality and decision-making, controlling your mind with invisible strings. So next time you make a judgment, be aware of the first number or idea that shaped it. Ask yourself if it's a true measure, or just an anchor dragging your mind off course. Availability heuristic. Your brain doesn't have time to analyze every piece of information in the world. Instead, it takes shortcuts, mental shortcuts that often lead you astray. The availability heuristic is one of these shortcuts. It tricks your mind into judging how likely something is based on how easily you can recall examples of it. The more vivid, recent, or emotionally intense a memory is, the easier it is to bring to mind, and your brain assumes that means it's common or important. This makes you overestimate rare but dramatic events, like plane crashes or violent crimes, simply because they're more memorable than everyday safe flights or quiet neighborhoods. For example, after hearing about a few dramatic plane accidents in the news, you might become convinced that flying is dangerous. But the truth, flying is statistically much safer than driving. Your brain, however, uses the loudest and most accessible memories to construct your reality, not the actual odds. This bias can shape your fears, your choices, and even your worldview, making you see the world as more dangerous or unpredictable than it really is. The scary part is, you don't realize it's happening. You think you're making rational decisions, but your brain is being fooled by vivid stories and emotional impressions. It's not just about fear. This heuristic influences everything from politics to personal relationships. It can make you believe in trends that aren't there, or ignore important facts because they don't stick in your memory. Your sense of reality is less about truth and more about what your brain can recall fastest. So the next time you feel overwhelmed by fear or convinced of something dramatic, stop and ask yourself, is this how things really are, or just how my brain remembers them? Gambler's fallacy. Picture this. You're at a roulette table, watching the ball land on red 5 times in a row. You're certain the next spin has to be black. It's got to balance out, right? The universe can't keep giving red forever. This is the gambler's fallacy, a powerful mental illusion where your brain mistakenly believes that past random events affect future outcomes, even when each event is completely independent. Your mind searches for patterns in pure chance, convinced that luck has a memory, that fairness will eventually prevail. But in reality, every spin is a fresh start. The wheel doesn't remember its past. The odds reset every single time. And yet, your brain refuses to accept that. This fallacy isn't confined to gambling tables. It seeps into everyday life without warning. You might avoid making a risky choice because you feel due for bad luck. Or you might double down on a streak of success, believing it will keep going. Whether it's betting on sports, investing in stocks, or simply hoping for the best, your brain wants order and fairness, even when the world offers chaos and randomness. This craving for balance drives you to see meaning where there is none. It convinces you that you can predict outcomes based on flawed logic and superstition. What makes the gambler's fallacy so dangerous is how deeply it can affect your decisions without you realizing it. You think you're playing smart, staying one step ahead, but you're actually trapped in a mental game, chasing illusions of control and justice in a world governed by chance. This fallacy lures you into risk, disappointment, and regret. It reveals a darker truth about human nature. Our brains desperately seek patterns, even in the most chaotic and unpredictable places. So the next time you believe luck is due to change your favor, remember this: each event stands alone. The past does not influence the future, and the universe doesn't owe you balance. Hindsight bias. You look back at a decision you made, maybe a choice, a prediction, or an event, and it suddenly feels obvious, like you knew it all along. You say to yourself, "I knew that was going to happen," or "It was so clear from the start." But here's the unsettling truth. That feeling is a lie. It's the mind's trick called hindsight bias, where memories are rewritten to make the past seem more predictable and certain than it really was. Your brain smooths over doubts, fears, and uncertainties, replacing them with a false sense of clarity. This bias isn't just harmless hindsight. It changes how you remember your own thought process, making you overconfident in your ability to predict outcomes. It feeds regret or pride, depending on whether things turned out well or badly. You forget the doubts you had, the alternatives you considered, and the risks you faced. Instead, your mind rewrites history, making it seem like you were smarter and more certain than you actually were. This distortion can affect everything from personal choices to how society judges major events, fueling overconfidence and underestimating uncertainty. What's truly disturbing is how this bias shields your ego from discomfort while simultaneously warping your view of reality. You think you've learned from the past, but in truth, you're trapped in a loop of false certainty. This makes it harder to prepare for the unpredictable, to accept mistakes, or to understand complex systems where outcomes are inherently uncertain. Hindsight bias blinds you to the true randomness and complexity of life, replacing it with neat, false narratives. So the next time you catch yourself thinking, "I knew it all along," pause and ask, "Did you really? Or is your mind just rewriting the story to make you feel better?" Primacy Effect. Have you ever noticed that the very first thing you learn about someone or something tends to stick with you the longest? That initial impression, that opening fact, often shapes your entire perception, no matter what comes afterward. This is the Primacy Effect, a powerful cognitive bias where your brain gives disproportionate weight to the first information it receives. It's as if your mind sets the stage and refuses to update the script, even when new, conflicting information appears later. This bias affects everything, from how you judge people in a meeting, to how you remember stories, to the decisions you make every day. For example, if the first impression of a person is negative, it colors everything they say or do afterward. Even if they prove themselves kind, talented, or trustworthy later, your brain clings stubbornly to that initial judgment. It creates a mental anchor so strong it warps your perception and filters reality through a distorted lens. The primacy effect shows how your brain prioritizes speed and efficiency over accuracy, often at the cost of truth. What makes this bias so unsettling is how unconscious it is. You think you're forming fair, balanced opinions, but your mind is quietly stacking the deck against anything that comes after the first impression. This effect can lead to misunderstandings, missed opportunities, and unfair judgments that stick for years. It reveals how your mind protects itself from overload by freezing early impressions, even when those impressions might be wrong or incomplete. So next time you meet someone new or hear a new idea for the first time, remember, your brain might already be deciding what's true before you've heard the whole story. Recency Effect. Ever notice how the last thing you hear or see tends to stick in your mind more than anything else? Whether it's the final words of a conversation, the last scene of a movie, or the closing arguments in a debate, those most recent pieces of information often carry the most weight. This is the recency effect. a cognitive bias where your brain gives extra importance to the latest information it received, sometimes at the expense of everything that came before. It's like your mind's final impression lingers longest, shaping your memories, judgments, and decisions more than you realize. This bias affects many areas of life, from how you remember lectures and presentations to how you judge people or events. Imagine watching a long speech where the speaker bombed the ending. Suddenly, the entire talk feels weaker, even if the earlier parts were strong and insightful. Or in a job interview, the last few answers might weigh more heavily in the decision than the entire conversation. Your brain, wired to prioritize recent input, can skew your perception, making the freshest memories seem most important, regardless of their overall value or truth. What's unsettling about the recency effect is how subtly it can warp your understanding without you noticing. You believe you're considering all information equally, but your mind naturally favors the newest details. This can cause you to overlook earlier, critical facts or insights simply because they've faded from your immediate memory. Over time, this bias can distort your worldview, shaping your beliefs and choices based on what you most recently encountered rather than the full picture. So next time you find yourself judging something or someone based on what just happened, pause and ask yourself, are you seeing the whole story or just the last chapter? Fundamental attribution error. When someone cuts you off in traffic or misses a deadline, your first thought might be that they're careless, rude, or irresponsible. But what if the truth is more complicated? The fundamental attribution error is a powerful mental trap where your brain instinctively blames people's character or personality for their actions, while ignoring external factors that might have influenced them. You assume their behavior reflects who they are, not the situation they're in. This bias shapes how you judge others, often unfairly, by ignoring context and overemphasizing internal traits. This error happens constantly in everyday life. You see a coworker snap at someone and immediately label them angry or mean without considering they might be under extreme stress or dealing with personal issues. You think a friend who cancels plans is unreliable, but don't consider that they might be overwhelmed or sick. Your brain prefers simple, clear explanations. It's easier to blame personality than to understand complex circumstances. This bias protects your mental energy, but at the cost of fairness and empathy. What makes the fundamental attribution error especially unsettling is how it fuels misunderstandings, conflicts, and social divisions. It hardens stereotypes, promotes judgment, and blinds you to the nuances of human behavior. You end up seeing people as caricatures, defined by isolated actions rather than full stories. This distortion not only damages relationships, but also limits your ability to grow in understanding and compassion. So next time you judge someone's behavior, pause and ask yourself, are you seeing the person, or just a moment out of context? Self-serving bias. When things go your way, you're quick to celebrate and claim the credit. That's because of me, you tell yourself, proud and confident. But when things fall apart, when failures or mistakes happen, your mind does something different. Suddenly, it's not your fault anymore. The blame shifts to external forces, bad luck, difficult circumstances, or other people's mistakes. This is the self-serving bias, a mental defense mechanism where your brain protects your ego by attributing success to your own skills and failures to anything but yourself. It's a survival tool designed to keep your self-esteem intact and your sense of identity unshaken. But it also distorts your understanding of reality in dangerous ways. This bias influences everything you do, from how you interpret your performance at work or school, to how you navigate your relationships and personal goals. You remember the wins as evidence of your talent and effort, while the losses are forgotten or explained away. Over time, this creates an unbalanced self-view where your strengths seem larger than life, and your faults barely exist. While this may boost confidence in the short term, It can also lead to arrogance, defensiveness, and a stubborn refusal to admit mistakes. Your brain wants to keep you feeling good about yourself, even if it means twisting the truth. What makes the self-serving bias so troubling is how unconscious it is. You genuinely believe you're being fair and objective, but your mind is quietly rewriting your story, molding your memories and interpretations to protect your ego. This can prevent you from learning from failures, growing as a person, or seeing yourself clearly. Instead, you stay trapped in a loop of distorted self-perception, blind to the role you play in setbacks. It's a shield and a trap, comforting but limiting. So next time you find yourself praising your successes or explaining away your failures, take a moment to pause and reflect. Are you seeing the whole truth, or just the part that keeps you comfortable? Because real growth begins when you face yourself, honestly and without excuses. Planning fallacy. You sit down to plan a project, maybe a school assignment, a work deadline, or even a simple task like cleaning your room. You're confident you'll finish it quickly, maybe even ahead of schedule. But as the deadline approaches, reality hits hard. You're behind, stressed, and scrambling to catch up. This is the planning fallacy, a cognitive bias where you consistently underestimate how long tasks will take, despite past experiences proving otherwise. Your brain paints an overly optimistic picture of the future, ignoring potential obstacles, distractions, and setbacks. This bias isn't about laziness or procrastination. It's a deeper flaw in how your mind imagines the future. You focus on the best-case scenario, the ideal conditions where everything goes smoothly. You forget to factor in interruptions, unexpected problems, or your own tendency to lose focus. It's like your brain wants to protect you from stress and overwhelm by convincing you things will be easier than they are. But this optimism can lead to missed deadlines, rushed work, and frustration. The planning fallacy affects individuals and entire organizations alike. From students who cram at the last minute to companies that blow budgets and miss launch dates, this bias can derail even the best intentions. What's scary is how resistant it is to change. Even when people learn from past mistakes, they fall into the same trap again, convinced this time will be different. Your brain's hopeful blindness blindsides your judgment, making it difficult to plan realistically. So the next time you set a deadline or make a schedule, remember to challenge your brain's optimism. Consider the worst-case scenarios, the distractions, the hurdles, and plan accordingly. Because in the game of time, hope isn't always a strategy. Endowment Effect. Imagine you buy a simple coffee mug for $5. It's nothing special, just a regular mug you found at the store. But the moment it becomes yours, the moment you own it, something strange happens. That mug suddenly feels worth a lot more. You wouldn't sell it for $5 anymore, maybe not even for $20. This is the endowment effect, a powerful psychological bias where your brain inflates the value of anything you own, just because it belongs to you. Ownership doesn't just mean possession, it means attachment, identity, emotional weight. This bias is deeply rooted in how your brain protects your sense of self. Once something is yours, your brain assigns it meaning beyond its actual utility or market value. It becomes part of your story, a reflection of who you are. That old jacket you refuse to throw away, the car you feel proud of, even intangible things like ideas or beliefs, all become overvalued in your mind. You start defending them fiercely, often irrationally. The endowment effect explains why sellers demand far more money than buyers are willing to pay. Why people hold on to junk, toxic relationships, or outdated beliefs just because they feel owned. What makes the endowment effect so dangerous is how subtly it warps your judgment. It blinds you to the true value of what you have, trapping you in emotional investments that may no longer serve you. You cling to possessions not because they're worth it, but because your brain convinces you they're part of you. This bias can lead to missed chances, financial losses, and emotional pain, all hidden behind a veil of attachment. So the next time you find yourself unwilling to let go or overestimating the value of something you own, ask yourself, is this worth keeping? Or am I just attached to ownership? Because sometimes your brain's need to protect identity can turn into a cage, holding you back from freedom. Loss aversion. Imagine losing $100. The pain, the frustration, the sinking feeling in your chest. It hits hard. Now imagine gaining $100. The happiness, the relief, maybe even a little excitement. But here's the catch. The pain of losing that $100 is far stronger than the joy of gaining the same amount. This is loss aversion, one of the most powerful and irrational forces in your mind. Your brain is wired to fear losses more than it values gains, making you avoid risks and cling desperately to what you have, even when the odds say you should let go. Loss aversion shapes nearly every decision you make, often without your awareness. It explains why investors hold losing stocks too long, hoping to avoid the pain of selling at a loss. Why gamblers chase losses, doubling down instead of walking away. Why you might stay in a toxic relationship or a dead-end job, because giving up feels worse than staying stuck. Your brain's overemphasis on loss creates a mental barrier to change, growth, and sometimes even survival. What makes loss aversion terrifying is how it distorts your perception of reality. You overvalue the familiar and undervalue potential opportunities. You make choices based on fear instead of logic. This bias traps you in a cycle of avoidance and regret, where protecting yourself from pain leads to greater suffering. Your mind's attempt to keep you safe ends up limiting your life. So next time you hesitate to take a risk or let go of something, remember this. The fear of loss is natural, but it shouldn't control your decisions. Sometimes, the greatest loss is never trying at all. Mere exposure effect. You've probably noticed it without realizing. The more you see something, the more you like it. A song grows on you after a few listens. A face becomes familiar and even attractive after repeated encounters. This is the mere exposure effect. A subtle but powerful psychological phenomenon, where repeated exposure to something increases your preference for it. It works silently, shaping your tastes, opinions, and relationships without you being aware of its influence. Your brain craves familiarity. It interprets repeated stimuli as safe, trustworthy, and comfortable. That comforting sense of "I know this" lowers your mental defenses and makes you more receptive. Advertisers exploit this effect by bombarding you with their products until you feel attached. Social groups form around familiar ideas and faces. Even your personal preferences, from music to politics, are molded by how often you encounter them. But this bias also has a darker side. It can trap you in echo chambers, limiting your openness to new experiences or ideas simply because they're unfamiliar. What's unsettling is how much the mere exposure effect operates below your awareness. You believe your likes and dislikes are choices made from free will, but they're often the product of repeated, subtle conditioning. Your mind shapes your reality not just by what you consciously decide, but by what it encounters most often. This invisible influence guides your behavior, relationships, and even your worldview without you realizing it's there. So the next time you find yourself drawn to something familiar, remember, your preference might not be a true choice. It could be your brain's way of seeking comfort in repetition. Status quo bias. Change is one of the hardest things for your brain to accept. Even when you know deep down that something new, a different job, a new routine, or a fresh perspective, could improve your life, your mind pulls you back toward what's familiar. This pull is called the status quo bias, a powerful cognitive shortcut where your brain prefers the current state of affairs, resisting change at almost any cost. Stability, predictability, and comfort outweigh potential benefits in your mind. Your brain convinces you that sticking with what you know is safer, easier, and less risky than stepping into the unknown. even when that unknown could bring real growth and happiness. This bias shapes countless decisions, big and small. People stay in toxic relationships or unfulfilling jobs, not because they don't want better, but because the fear of uncertainty and disruption feels overwhelming. You might reject new ideas or opportunities simply because they challenge your current way of thinking. Your brain's deep-seated need for consistency protects you from the stress of change, but also blinds you to the possibilities waiting beyond your comfort zone. The familiar feels safe, even if it's painful. The unknown feels dangerous, even if it's promising. What makes the status quo bias especially dangerous is how unconscious and automatic it is. You believe you're making rational, thoughtful choices, but your mind is quietly defending the status quo, filtering information to justify staying put. This resistance can stall personal growth, innovation, and healing. It traps you in cycles where you feel stuck, powerless, and frustrated. The bias reveals a fundamental tension in your mind, the conflict between your desire for comfort and your need to evolve. So the next time you find yourself resisting change, take a deep breath and ask, are you truly protecting what's best for you? Or just clinging to what's familiar out of fear? Because sometimes the hardest, scariest step toward growth is the one that breaks you free from comfort's chains. Optimism bias. You probably think bad things happen to other people, not to you. That you're more likely to succeed than fail, that your future will be brighter than your past, and that you'll dodge most of life's dangers and setbacks. This hopeful belief isn't just wishful thinking. It's a powerful mental quirk called the optimism bias, a cognitive distortion where your brain convinces you that positive outcomes are far more likely than they really are. Your mind filters reality through rose-colored glasses, emphasizing hope and minimizing risks and threats, even when the facts say otherwise. This bias can be a double-edged sword. On one hand, optimism helps you take risks, persevere through challenges, and maintain motivation. It fuels dreams, ambition, and resilience. But on the other hand, it blinds you to real dangers and prepares you poorly for failure. You might underestimate health risks, financial troubles, or relationship problems because your brain insists those things won't happen to you. This can lead to reckless decisions, disappointment, and painful surprises. Your mind's natural desire to protect you from despair ends up setting you up for blindsides. What makes the optimism bias so powerful is how deeply it shapes your worldview without your awareness. You don't realize how much your brain is filtering out negativity and emphasizing possibility. This bias colors your planning, your judgment, and even your memory, selectively highlighting successes and downplaying failures. It sustains hope, but also sows vulnerability. The line between healthy optimism and dangerous denial is razor thin. So the next time you feel invincible, or that everything will work out perfectly, pause and ask yourself, are you seeing reality, or just the future your brain wants you to believe? Because sometimes, true strength comes from facing the worst, not just hoping it won't happen. Belief bias. Your brain doesn't just want to find the truth, it wants to find comfort. The belief bias is a mental trap where you judge arguments not on their logical strength or evidence, but on how much their conclusions fit with what you already believe. When an idea aligns with your worldview, your mind eagerly accepts it, even if the reasoning is shaky or flawed. But if the conclusion challenges your beliefs, your brain instinctively rejects it, no matter how sound the logic may be. This bias isn't just stubbornness. It's your mind protecting your identity and sense of reality by filtering and distorting information. Belief bias shapes every corner of your thinking. Politics, religion, social issues, personal choices. It controls how you process news, conversations, and debates. When faced with information, your brain doesn't act as an impartial judge. Instead, it becomes a biased lawyer, twisting facts cherry-picking evidence, and creating mental justifications that reinforce what you already want to believe. This bias doesn't just blind you to opposing views, it actively rewires your reasoning to support your beliefs, making it incredibly difficult to change your mind or see alternative perspectives. What's truly unsettling is how unconscious and automatic this process is. You think you're engaging in fair and logical thinking, but your brain is often just rationalizing your preferences and fears. Belief bias fuels polarization and misinformation by making it nearly impossible to engage in honest dialogue or critical self-reflection. It traps you in an echo chamber, where your beliefs are echoed back and amplified, drowning out any challenge to your worldview. Your mind becomes a fortress, defending itself not against falsehood, but against discomfort and uncertainty. So the next time you encounter an argument that challenges your deeply held beliefs, pause and ask yourself, am I truly evaluating this on its merits? Or am I just defending my comfort zone? Because the pursuit of truth demands courage, the courage to question not only the world, but also yourself. Just world hypothesis. Deep down, you want to believe the world is fair, that good things happen to good people, and bad things happen to those who deserve it. This comforting idea is called the just world hypothesis, a cognitive bias where your brain insists on a predictable moral order in the universe. It convinces you that the world is fundamentally just, that everyone gets what they deserve, and that suffering must be the result of some fault or failing. This belief gives you a sense of control and meaning in an otherwise chaotic, random world. But it's also a dangerous illusion. The just world hypothesis shapes how you interpret events around you, especially suffering and injustice. When you see someone in pain or misfortune, your mind tries to explain it by blaming the victim, assuming they must have done something to deserve their fate. This protects your own sense of safety and fairness, because if the world is just, then you can avoid the same fate by behaving right. But this bias blinds you to real injustice, cruelty, and randomness. It makes empathy harder and fosters judgment and victim blaming. What's terrifying is how deeply ingrained and unconscious this bias is. You believe you're rational and compassionate, but your brain is defending you from uncomfortable truths about randomness and unfairness. The just world hypothesis fuels social inequality, discrimination, and cruelty by justifying suffering as deserved. It traps you in a false narrative where the world is orderly and moral, even when reality screams otherwise. So the next time you find yourself blaming a victim or assuming justice has been served, pause and ask yourself, is this true justice, or just a comforting lie your brain needs to survive? Because sometimes, the hardest truth to face is that the world is not always fair. Survivorship bias. Have you ever been inspired by stories of wildly successful entrepreneurs, athletes, or artists? Those who made it big against all odds? You think, if they did it, so can I. But here's the catch. You're only seeing the winners. This is the survivorship bias, a mental shortcut where your brain focuses only on the survivors, the successes, and ignores the countless failures that didn't make the spotlight. It distorts your perception of reality, making success seem easier and more common than it really is. The bias works because failures often disappear from view. Failed businesses, careers cut short, dreams abandoned. They're invisible to most of us. Yet your brain builds narratives based solely on the visible successes, creating a misleading story of how success happens. This can lead you to underestimate risks, overestimate your chances, and make decisions based on an incomplete picture. Survivorship bias fuels overconfidence, reckless ambition, and disappointment when reality doesn't match the rosy stories. What's unsettling is how natural this bias feels. You believe you're learning from examples, drawing lessons from the best. But in reality, your mind is selectively ignoring crucial data. the failures and struggles that shape the path to success. It blinds you to the true cost of achievement and the sheer randomness of outcomes. This bias doesn't just skew your perception of success. It shapes your expectations, your goals, and your understanding of what's possible. So the next time you admire a success story, remember, for every winner you see, there are countless untold failures behind the scenes. And sometimes, the biggest lesson isn't in the triumph, but in the silence of the fallen. Moral luck. Imagine judging someone's character based on a decision they made. But what if that judgment depends on factors completely outside their control? This unsettling dilemma is called moral luck, a philosophical and psychological paradox where people are praised or blamed not only for their choices, but also for outcomes shaped by chance, luck, or circumstance. It challenges the very notion of fairness, responsibility, and moral judgment, revealing a deep inconsistency in how we evaluate ourselves and others. Moral luck shows up in everyday life more than you realize. Two people may make the same risky decision. One gets away unharmed, the other suffers devastating consequences. Society tends to praise the fortunate and condemn the unlucky, even when their choices were identical. Your brain struggles to separate intent from outcome, mixing morality with randomness. This bias affects legal judgments, social perceptions, and even self-assessments. It forces us to confront a hard truth. Our moral evaluations are often influenced by luck rather than justice. What makes moral luck so disturbing is how it undermines the idea of a fair, just world. You want to believe that people are fully responsible for their actions, but sometimes fortune plays a hidden role in determining who is rewarded and who is punished. This creates a tension between justice and reality, leaving you questioning the fairness of praise, blame, and guilt. Moral luck exposes the fragile line between moral agency and chance, and how easily that line can blur. So the next time you judge someone's actions or your own, consider this: how much of morality is truly earned, and how much is handed out by chance? Because sometimes the hardest judgment is accepting that luck plays a role in justice. Hard-easy effect. You walk into a challenge feeling confident, ready to tackle it. When the task seems easy, your brain often inflates your confidence, making you believe success is nearly guaranteed. But when the same challenge becomes hard, complex, or uncertain, your mind flips the script. Suddenly, your confidence shrinks, doubt creeps in, and fear takes hold. This mental rollercoaster is known as the hard-easy effect, a cognitive bias where your self-assurance wildly swings depending on how difficult you think a task is, regardless of your actual ability or chances of success. This bias plays a cruel trick on your mind, distorting how you assess your skills and potential. When things feel simple, your brain oversells your competence, sometimes pushing you to rush in, underestimate obstacles, or ignore warning signs. Overconfidence can lead to careless mistakes, missed details, and failures you never saw coming. But when faced with real complexity or uncertainty, the effect reverses. Your brain underestimates your capability, magnifies the challenge, and sows seeds of self-doubt. You hesitate, procrastinate, or give up before you've even truly begun. The hard-easy effect isn't about how skilled you are. It's about your mind's reaction to perceived difficulty. It reflects a deep, automatic adjustment of confidence based on your expectations, not reality. What makes this so insidious is how unconscious it is. You believe you're evaluating yourself fairly, but your brain's emotional response to challenge biases your self-image and decisions. This effect doesn't just shape how you approach tasks. It influences your growth, your motivation, and even your identity. Overconfidence can blind you to your limits, while underconfidence can keep you trapped beneath your potential. Your mind becomes a battlefield of conflicting impulses, pushing and pulling your confidence, without your awareness. So the next time you face a challenge, whether it looks easy or hard, pay close attention to how confident you feel. Ask yourself, is this confidence rooted in reality, or just a trick of perception? Because mastering yourself means seeing clearly, beyond the mind's illusions. Clustering illusion. Your brain is wired to find patterns. It looks for order in chaos, meaning in randomness. But sometimes it sees patterns that aren't really there. Illusions created by chance, mistaken for meaningful signals. This is the clustering illusion, a cognitive bias where your mind perceives clusters or streaks in random data and interprets them as significant or predictive. It's why people see winning streaks in gambling, conspiracies in random events, or messages hidden in coincidences. The clustering illusion reveals how easily your perception of reality can be warped by your brain's hunger for structure. When you see a sequence of coin flips landing heads several times in a row, your mind assumes it's a hot streak, ignoring the true randomness behind each toss. In everyday life, this bias fuels superstitions, false beliefs, and conspiracy theories. It tricks you into seeing causality where there is only coincidence. Your brain refuses to accept randomness, preferring the comfort of patterns. What's unsettling about this illusion is how deeply it influences your judgments without your awareness. You think you're analyzing data objectively, but your mind is filling gaps with imagined connections. This can lead to poor decisions, misplaced trust, and even paranoia. The clustering illusion exposes the fragile line between order and chaos in your perception, showing that sometimes what you think is meaningful is just noise. So the next time you spot a pattern that feels important, stop and ask yourself, is this real connection, or just your brain chasing shadows in randomness? Groupthink. You're part of a group, a team, a circle of friends, a community, and everyone seems to agree on something important. At first, it feels good to be part of the consensus. It's easier, safer, and more comfortable to go along with the majority. But beneath the surface, a dangerous mental trap may be unfolding. Groupthink, a psychological phenomenon where the desire for harmony and conformity within a group overrides critical thinking, leading to poor decisions and irrational outcomes. Groupthink silences dissent and discourages alternative viewpoints. People suppress their doubts and concerns to avoid conflict or rejection. The group becomes an echo chamber, amplifying shared beliefs and ignoring warning signs or contradictory evidence. This collective blind spot can lead to disastrous decisions, from corporate failures to political blunders to social tragedies. The pressure to conform makes individuals sacrifice their own judgment for the sake of unity, often with devastating consequences. What makes groupthink so unsettling is how easily it can infect any group, no matter how intelligent or well-meaning. You might not even realize it's happening until the damage is done. The illusion of agreement becomes so strong that critical voices are dismissed or silenced. Creativity, innovation, and honest debate get stifled. The group becomes trapped in a feedback loop of reinforcing false beliefs and ignoring reality. So the next time you find yourself in a group where everyone seems to agree too quickly, pause and ask yourself, is this true consensus, or just a dangerous silence of dissent? Because real wisdom comes not from agreement, but from courage to question and challenge the crowd. False consensus effect. You believe your thoughts are normal, your values are common, your opinions are shared by most reasonable people, right? But what if they're not? The false consensus effect is a psychological illusion where your brain overestimates how many others think, act, or feel the same way you do. It convinces you that your worldview is the default, that your beliefs are obvious, and that anyone who disagrees must be part of a strange minority. This bias creates a comforting sense of belonging, a false reassurance that you're not alone in your choices. But that comfort comes at a cost. It leads you to misjudge public opinion, assume too much agreement, and overlook how truly diverse the world really is. It narrows your perception and fuels misunderstanding. When people disagree, you might feel confused, even threatened, as if they're the ones being irrational, instead of just different. The false consensus effect distorts relationships, conversations, even entire societies. It makes you less curious and more dismissive. You stop asking questions and start defending assumptions. Your bubble thickens. And worst of all, you don't even notice it happening, because your brain tricks you into believing your own thoughts are universal truth. So next time you assume everyone else thinks like you, stop and ask yourself, is this really consensus? Or just my brain mistaking familiarity for fact? Because the scariest illusion of all is believing you're speaking for the world when you're only echoing yourself. Actor-observer bias. You trip over a step and instantly know why. You were distracted. The ground was uneven. Maybe you didn't sleep well. It wasn't your fault. But when someone else does the same thing, your brain jumps to a different conclusion. They're clumsy. They weren't paying attention. This is the actor-observer bias, a subtle but powerful distortion where you judge your own behavior based on circumstance, but judge others based on personality. When you mess up, your mind becomes a defense attorney, listing every possible excuse to protect your self-image. But when someone else makes a mistake, it becomes a harsh judge, quick to assign blame. The same action, two different interpretations, depending on who's involved. This bias twists how you see the world, making you more forgiving of yourself and more critical of everyone else. It's dangerous because it builds walls between people. It fuels misunderstanding, resentment, and conflict. You think others are flawed while you're just reacting to your environment. Over time, it creates a distorted sense of superiority, a belief that your actions are justified, but theirs are revealing something fundamentally wrong with them. What's unsettling is that this bias operates silently. You rarely notice it, even though it affects nearly every interaction. From how you see strangers on the street to how you argue with people you care about. Your brain's need to protect itself ends up eroding empathy. So the next time you're quick to judge someone's behavior, ask yourself, if I did the same thing, would I be making excuses? Because seeing clearly doesn't just mean understanding the world. It means understanding how unfairly we see each other. Curse of knowledge. Once you know something, it's almost impossible to imagine what it's like not to know it. That insight, that fact, that skill, it feels so obvious now, so second nature, that you forget it was ever confusing in the first place. This is the curse of knowledge, a silent, invisible bias where your own understanding blinds you to the ignorance of others. It tricks you into thinking what's clear to you must be clear to everyone else. It shows up everywhere. Teachers overwhelmed by students who just don't get it. Creators baffled when people miss the point. Experts frustrated by beginners. You explain something once, and when others don't understand, you blame them, not realizing your brain has lost touch with what it's like to be in their shoes. The deeper your knowledge, the harder it becomes to break it down, to teach it well, or to communicate it clearly. What makes the curse of knowledge so dangerous is how quietly it builds walls between people. You think you're being obvious, you think you're making sense, but you're speaking from a mind that's been shaped by years of exposure, trial, and intuition, and expecting others to catch up instantly. It kills patience, destroys communication, and turns intelligence into isolation. So the next time someone doesn't understand you, pause before getting frustrated. Ask yourself, have I forgotten what it felt like to be lost? Because the real test of understanding is not how much you know, but how well you can help someone who doesn't. Negativity bias. You could hear 10 compliments in one day, but it's the single insult you'll remember. You could experience 100 peaceful moments, but one argument, one mistake, one threat, and your whole mood shifts. This is the negativity bias, your brain's built-in tendency to focus more on negative experiences than positive ones. It's not weakness, it's wiring. Evolution taught your ancestors to survive by paying attention to danger. And that survival instinct still lives inside your mind today. This bias affects everything: how you remember the past, how you judge yourself, how you react to people. A single bad review feels heavier than a dozen good ones. One failure can eclipse countless victories. Even in relationships, one sharp word can echo louder than weeks of kindness. Your mind clings to negativity, not because it hates you, but because it thinks it's protecting you. The problem? In today's world, that ancient alarm system doesn't always serve you. Instead of keeping you safe, it keeps you anxious, doubtful, and trapped in cycles of overthinking. Negativity. Bias can poison your confidence, your memories, and your joy, all while convincing you it's just being realistic. But it's not. It's a distortion. A magnifying glass held over your worst moments, while the good ones quietly fade. And if you don't recognize it, you'll start believing that life is darker than it really is. Not because it is, but because your brain keeps highlighting the shadows. So the next time your mind fixates on the one bad thing, pause and ask yourself, is this truly the full picture, or just the loudest part? Because peace doesn't come from silence. It comes from learning how to turn down the volume on your own fears. Affect heuristic. You think you're being rational, weighing facts, thinking clearly, making decisions based on logic. But more often than not, your choices are driven by one thing: how you feel in the moment. This is the affect heuristic, a mental shortcut where your emotions become the lens through which you judge risk, reward, truth, and consequence. If something feels good, you believe it must be safe, right, or beneficial. If it feels bad, you assume it's dangerous, wrong, or not worth the risk, regardless of the actual facts. This bias hijacks your decision-making without warning. A friendly-looking person seems more trustworthy, even if you know nothing about them. A product that makes you feel excited seems like a smart purchase, even if it's overpriced. A headline that sparks fear makes you believe the danger is real, even if there's no evidence behind it. Your brain leans on emotion to simplify complexity, skipping over reason in favor of a quick gut reaction. What makes the affect heuristic so unsettling is how subtle and convincing it is. You don't realize you're doing it. You feel like you've thought things through, when in reality, you've just followed your feelings down a path that may not lead to truth. It shapes your worldview, your values, your politics, your purchases, even how you remember the past. And unless you stop to question it, it becomes your default compass, even when it's leading you the wrong way. So the next time something feels right or wrong instantly, ask yourself, is this emotion or evidence? Because the fastest answer isn't always the truest, especially when your heart's doing the thinking. Contrast effect. Your judgment isn't fixed, it's relative. You don't see things as they are, you see them in comparison to whatever came just before. This is the contrast effect, a powerful cognitive distortion where your brain evaluates something not on its own merits, but in contrast to what it just experienced. It warps your perception of value, beauty, difficulty, even pain. You might think you're being objective, but in reality, your mind is constantly comparing, and letting those comparisons dictate how you feel, think, and choose. Think about this. If you lift a heavy object and then immediately pick up a lighter one, the second feels feather-light, even if it isn't. If you meet someone average-looking after seeing someone stunning, you might perceive them as less attractive than they actually are. If you're shown a bad deal first, a mediocre one might seem like a bargain. Your brain can't help it. It uses whatever came before as a reference point, and that reference point anchors your reality. The contrast effect isn't just a harmless mental quirk. It shapes how you view people, opportunities, even yourself. It can make you overvalue something just because it followed something worse, or undervalue greatness because it came after perfection. It distorts fairness, clouds judgment, and plays tricks on your expectations. In relationships, jobs, purchases, and life decisions, this bias silently shifts your standards. And the scariest part? You often don't realize your mind is doing it. So the next time something seems better, or worse than it should, pause and ask yourself, am I seeing this clearly? Or just through the shadow of what came before? Because sometimes the truth isn't what's in front of you. It's what your mind just left behind. Bystander Effect. You tell yourself that if something terrible happened in front of you, if someone collapsed, cried out, got attacked, or needed help, you'd be the one to act. You'd rush in, be the hero, save a life. But psychology paints a far darker picture. The bystander effect is a haunting flaw in human behavior, where the presence of others makes you less likely to intervene in an emergency. Not more, less. The logic feels backward. More people should mean more chances for help. But in truth, the responsibility doesn't grow. It disappears. It spreads like fog across the crowd. Everyone assumes someone else will do something. Everyone hesitates. Everyone waits. And in that hesitation, nothing happens. A woman can be beaten in public. A child can be drowning. A man can lie bleeding in the street. And dozens of people will walk by. Not because they're evil, but because their brain whispers, if it was truly serious, someone else would have acted already. You look to the crowd for cues, see their inaction, and mirror it. You tell yourself that someone more qualified will help. Someone older, braver, smarter. And in that split second of silent calculations, opportunity turns to regret. The scariest part is how normal the feeling is. You don't even realize it's happening. You're just standing there, watching, unsure, frozen. And while your conscience shouts inside, your body obeys the logic of the group. Even in tragedies that made headlines, people reported feeling detached, unsure, or believing they weren't needed, all while lives slipped away just feet in front of them. It's one of the darkest tricks your mind plays, convincing you that inaction is safer, smarter, or not your place. But the truth is brutal. The more people there are, the less any one person feels the need to act. And sometimes, no one does. So if the moment ever comes, and you feel that hesitation, that pull to stay quiet, still, invisible, remember this: your silence is part of the illusion. Step forward, speak, act, be the one who breaks the freeze. Because when everyone thinks someone else will save them, the world becomes a place where no one ever does. Pseudocertainty Effect. You're standing at a crossroads, staring at two choices. One path seems clearer, cleaner, safer. The other is tangled in unknowns, lined with risk, cloaked in doubt. Instinctively, you reach for the one that looks certain, the one with the clear outcome, the one that makes you feel like you're in control. But that comfort? It's a lie. This is the pseudo-certainty effect, a hidden mental glitch where your brain clings to the illusion of safety in uncertain situations by pretending parts of the risk don't exist. You simplify reality to protect your peace. You cut out the chaos to preserve your sense of control. You pretend that because one part of the decision feels clear, the whole thing must be. But deep down, you know the truth. Nothing is certain. Not the choice, not the outcome, not even how you'll feel once it's done. And still, your mind pushes you to the comforting illusion. Not because it's smarter, but because it's easier to swallow. You do it with money, relationships, your future. focusing on one certain piece while ignoring the surrounding uncertainty. You think, at least I'll have this, or that part's guaranteed, as if those fragments can shield you from the storm around them. You base your decisions on isolated outcomes, on short-term safety, on the parts that look solid, while the rest of the picture quietly shifts beneath you. It's not logic, it's fear wearing logic's mask. The fear of chaos, the fear of regret, the fear that you don't have control and never did. And so your brain invents it, wraps it in numbers, wraps it in reason, hides it in half-truths and selective focus. It doesn't want to make the best decision. It wants to make the one that feels less terrifying in the moment. The Pseudocertainty Effect doesn't just distort your judgment, it stunts your growth. It leads you to avoid risk even when the reward is real. It traps you in mediocrity, in decisions that feel safe but slowly bleed your potential. And all the while, you walk forward believing you chose clarity, when all you really chose was the more comfortable lie. So the next time something feels secure, guaranteed, and painless, stop and ask yourself, what part of the truth am I choosing not to see? Because in a world full of unknowns, the most dangerous thing your mind can do is pretend there aren't any. Hyperbolic discounting. You say you'll start tomorrow, that you'll save next month, that your future self will be more disciplined, more patient, more focused than the person you are right now. You believe that later will be easier, that you'll want it more, that you'll finally follow through. But every time the moment arrives, you don't. You choose what feels good now. You pick comfort over progress. You trade your long-term goals for short-term pleasure. This isn't just procrastination. It's hyperbolic discounting, a twisted flaw in your brain's decision-making system, where immediate rewards feel far more valuable than future ones, even if the future reward is greater. Your mind doesn't weigh all rewards equally. It distorts time itself, bending your perception so that now glows bright and later fades into shadow. You say you want to be healthy, wealthy, disciplined, but when the reward isn't instant, your brain loses interest. It craves dopamine now, not success later. And so you scroll instead of build. You spend instead of save. You sleep instead of rise. And every time you tell yourself you'll do better next time, not realizing that your future self will face the same illusion, the same craving, the same quiet lie. Hyperbolic discounting is why your goals die slow deaths in the back of your mind, why your future feels like it belongs to someone else, why the dreams you planned for years ago still haven't arrived, because every later became another not today. Your brain sacrifices your future for your present, again and again, feeding you comfort while starving your potential. And the most terrifying part, you know you're doing it. You feel the conflict, the guilt, the awareness, the quiet voice that says you're sabotaging yourself. And you do it anyway, because the reward you can taste now always feels more real than the one you hope to reach later. It's a trap built into your biology. And unless you see it, fight it, override it, you'll keep choosing the same easy wrong day after day until your time runs out and your future becomes a ghost of what could have been. So next time you say later, ask yourself, is that truly a plan? Or just another escape disguised as patience? Empathy gap. When you're calm, everything makes sense. You say you'll stay rational during an argument. You'll stay disciplined when you're tempted. You'll make good decisions even under stress. But then comes the heat, the panic, the hunger, the anger, the pressure, and suddenly you're someone else. The promises you made disappear. The logic fades. The control slips. This is the empathy gap. Your brain's inability to understand how different your thoughts, feelings, and behaviors become once you shift into an emotional state. It tricks you into thinking you'll stay in control, but it doesn't let you feel the future version of yourself. You plan from calmness, but you act from chaos. The empathy gap makes you underestimate how much your emotions can hijack your choices. When you're full, you forget how desperate hunger makes you. When you're sober, you forget how reckless you become when drunk. When you're rested, you forget how hopeless everything feels when you're exhausted. It creates a wall between your current self and your future states. A wall so thick, you can't even imagine how different you'll be on the other side. So you judge others from the outside of their pain, saying, "I would have never done that," without realizing that you might, given the right storm. It leads to broken self-promises, unfair judgments, and blind spots that ruin relationships and self-trust. What makes the empathy gap so eerie is how invisible it is. You feel like you're thinking clearly. You believe your predictions are realistic, but your brain is lying, not out of malice, but out of limitation. It doesn't let you truly feel the extremes until you're already inside them. And once you are, it's too late to think like the version of you who planned ahead. So if you want to master your future, don't just plan from reason. Plan for your own chaos. Because your calm mind writes the rules, but your emotional self decides whether they'll ever be followed. Semantic priming. You think your thoughts are your own, that the words you choose, the ideas you consider, the memories you access, all come from within. But beneath your awareness, something else is guiding them. A whisper, a cue, a single word. And suddenly, your entire mind shifts direction. This is semantic priming, a psychological phenomenon where exposure to one concept subtly influences your thoughts, emotions, and behaviors related to another, without you even realizing it. A word you just saw, an image you barely noticed, a sentence overheard in passing, and your brain begins to link things, fill in blanks, tilt your judgment, without your permission. You're shown the word doctor, and your mind is already closer to nurse than hammer. You hear old, and suddenly you walk slower. You read the word angry, and your next memory feels more aggressive. Semantic priming reveals how fragile your perception is, how easily your thoughts can be pushed, colored, reshaped by something as small as a word. You're not choosing your next idea. You're reacting to silent triggers planted moments ago. The scariest part is that you feel like it's you, like the decisions are logical, like the emotions are yours. But the truth is that you're walking a path that was quietly laid before you, step by invisible step. This effect infects everything: marketing, politics, conversation, even memory. You remember events differently depending on the words used to describe them. You judge people not by who they are, but by the concepts your brain was primed to connect with them. You don't notice it because priming happens just below consciousness, like a shadow behind your thoughts, steering without being seen. And the more you deny it's happening, the more power it has. So next time a word flashes across a screen, a phrase slips into your feed, or an idea pops into your head out of nowhere, pause. Ask yourself, who planted that seed, and where is it leading me? Choice overload. You walk into a store, open an app, scroll through options, and it should feel empowering. More choices mean more freedom, right? But instead, something strange happens. You freeze, you second guess. You walk away with nothing or pick something you're unsure about. This is choice overload, a psychological trap where too many options don't give you clarity. They paralyze you. Your brain gets overwhelmed. Decision fatigue sets in. You start fearing that whatever you pick, it might not be the best. So you either avoid the choice entirely or make one you'll later regret. The mind was never built for infinite options. It evolved to choose between a few berries, a few paths, a few dangers. But now, you're bombarded with dozens of cereals, hundreds of shows, thousands of products, endless life paths, each one whispering that you could have done better. So you spend more time comparing than enjoying. You pick something safe, or you pick nothing. And when you finally decide, it doesn't feel like freedom. It feels like loss. You didn't celebrate the thing you chose. You mourn the ones you didn't. And your mind keeps asking, what if I picked wrong? This overload doesn't just waste time. It rots your peace. It creates stress, anxiety, regret, and perfectionism. The more options you have, the higher your expectations become. But reality rarely matches the fantasy, so you chase better and better until every choice feels like a trap. The illusion is that more choice gives you control, but sometimes the more doors you see, the harder it is to walk through any of them. So next time you're stuck, drowning in options, ask yourself, are you seeking the best, or just afraid to live with good enough? Because freedom isn't having every choice. It's knowing which ones to ignore. Distinction bias. You're comparing two things, two jobs, two people, two lives, and suddenly one feels clearly better. Not because it truly is, but because you're seeing them side by side. This is the distinction bias, a mental trap where your brain overemphasizes small differences when comparing things directly, even though those differences would barely matter when experienced alone. You put them under a microscope, pick them apart, amplify flaws, obsess over tiny advantages, and convince yourself one is worth far more than the other. But when you live with the choice, the difference fades. What felt massive in comparison becomes invisible in isolation. Your brain doesn't judge things in a vacuum. It judges them against what's next to them. That car looks worse only because another is shinier. That life path feels dull only because someone else's looks more glamorous at that moment. That choice seems wrong only because your focus is on what it isn't, not what it is. The distinction bias makes you forget what actually matters day to day, how something feels when it stands alone, when no other option is flashing beside it. This bias infects decisions with doubt. You pick the bigger screen, the faster phone, the job with slightly more pay, and still feel empty. Because you didn't choose based on real value. You chose based on amplified contrast. The illusion is that comparison clarifies, but in truth, it distorts. It turns simplicity into confusion and preference into pressure. It makes you trade happiness for marginal gains that don't even register once the decision is behind you. So the next time you're torn between two things, stop. Don't ask which looks better. Ask which feels right when imagined alone. Because clarity doesn't come from contrast. It comes from stepping outside the noise. Peak-end rule. You think you remember things accurately. A vacation, a conversation, a relationship, a year of your life. But your memory isn't built like a video camera. It's built like a story. And your brain decides how that story ends, not based on the full experience, but on two fragments, the peak and the end. This is the peak-end rule, a psychological illusion where you judge an entire experience not by its average, not by its duration, but by its most intense moment and how it concluded. A perfect trip with one terrible night. You remember the pain, a boring day with an amazing ending. You remember the joy, and the rest, the slow, quiet, steady truth, gets erased. This bias shapes how you feel about your past, how you rate your happiness, even how you make decisions for the future. It's why people return to painful places that ended well, or avoid good ones that ended badly. It's why you romanticize a toxic relationship because of a few magical highs, or resent a friend because of one bitter goodbye. The brain distills complexity into a shortcut. It simplifies reality into a single flash and a final note, and those moments become the anchor for everything else. You don't remember the full shape of the experience. You remember the spike and the silence that followed. What makes the peak-end rule so dangerous is how quietly it warps your past. It rewrites your stories without asking permission. It makes you forget how long the suffering lasted, or how good the average really was. It leads you to trust your memory, not knowing that your memory has been edited, trimmed, sharpened, manipulated by intensity and closure. And so you chase peaks, you chase endings, and sometimes you destroy the middle. So the next time you reflect on something and feel joy, regret, or nostalgia, pause. Ask yourself, am I remembering the whole or just the highlight and the final breath? Because your past isn't what happened. It's what your mind decided to keep.